Afghanistan, the graveyard where American dreams died. Afghanistan, land of rugged mountains and harsh deserts. Villages that seem untouched by time. Yet this very soil became a graveyard for thousands of American dreams. After the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the US invaded Afghanistan, expecting a swift victory against the Taliban. But instead of months, the war dragged on for 2 decades, leaving behind pain and wounds that never truly healed. In today's story, we'll dive into what the Taliban did to American soldiers, from mountain ambushes to roadside bombs causing fear, to betrayals from supposed allies. This wasn't just a war, it was a tragedy. Soldiers faced an elusive enemy, and sometimes, even those they thought they could trust. Stay with us to the end of the video to truly grasp what happened in America's longest war. And don't forget to subscribe to H2O Story. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our most shocking and gripping historical tales. October 7, 2001. Just a month after the 9th of November rocked the world, Afghanistan's skies roared with American jets. Operation Enduring Freedom had officially begun. Its objective was crystal clear: to overthrow the Taliban regime and destroy the safe havens of Al-Qaeda. Waves of fighter jets, bombers, and cruise missiles were launched. Targets included training camps, communication centers, and government buildings held by the Taliban, while the sky lit up with ordnance. On the ground, US Special Forces moved in silently. They weren't alone. Alongside them was the Northern Alliance Afghan fighters who'd resisted the Taliban for years. US troops marched through desolate mountains and scorching deserts. This was unknown territory, with maps still largely blank. They carried advanced weaponry but also relied on basic transport. Some soldiers rode horses alongside local fighters, a hand on the reins, a rifle in the other. Many carried cash to bribe tribal leaders, seeking their support. In the early days, the campaign seemed to go surprisingly well. Kabul, Afghanistan's capital, fell quickly. Then Kandahar, then Herat. Major cities were captured by US forces and allies. Taliban fighters abandoned tanks, weapons, and scattered in disarray. The American press at the time declared a swift victory. In Washington, many believed this war would soon end. The Taliban would be wiped out in months. But that was just initial optimism. While the US celebrated these major wins, the Taliban chose a different path. They stopped defending cities, stopped confronting directly. Instead, they quietly retreated into the Tora Bora Mountains, hiding in arid southern deserts, or crossing into Pakistan for safety. They began planning for a long war. Not conventional warfare, but guerrilla tactics. The enemy no longer wore uniforms, no longer stood in lines. They blended with villagers, hiding in small homes, and using deep caves as secret bases. The Americans at the time couldn't fathom. They'd walked into a never-ending conflict. A war where every road, village, and mountainside could be a deadly trap. By 2002, the war in Afghanistan entered a new phase. The mountains of Paktia and Khost became zones of terror. US patrols began facing deadly ambushes. The Taliban didn't rush, they patiently waited for hours on the slopes. Weapons hidden under rocks or covered by old blankets. They watched every move of US convoys. They knew the routes US soldiers frequented. And when the troops entered a narrow gorge or a deep valley, the sudden silence exploded with machine gun fire from the cliff sides, artillery rounds from above, shoulder-fired missiles and rocket-propelled grenades flew. Stranded convoys had no escape route. Everything happened in seconds. Soldiers who were just chatting moments before suddenly had to run for their lives. One of the fiercest battles occurred in March 2002. It was Operation Anaconda. US and Allied forces entered the Shahikot Valley. They believed they had trapped Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters. But in reality, they'd walked into a trap. Over 1,000 Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters had dug tunnels and built fortifications in mountain caves. As US soldiers advanced, fire rained down from all sides. Gunfire echoed off the cliffs. Explosions turned the valley into hell. US helicopters tried to deliver reinforcements, but they were immediately hit by intense ground fire. Many had to make emergency landings or were shot down mid-air. Supply lines were cut. Vehicles couldn't move on roads now controlled by the Taliban. The weather worsened the situation. Dense fog and snow obscured visibility. The mountains became a deadly maze. These mountains became a deadly maze. A battle raged for over 2 weeks. It was one of the bloodiest fights of the war's early days. 8 US soldiers died, dozens more injured. Allied forces, including Afghan fighters and soldiers from other nations, also suffered heavy losses. The battle at ICOD sent a chilling message. The Taliban hadn't disappeared. They'd just changed tactics. And they were ready to turn every valley, every hillside into a death trap. For US soldiers, Afghanistan was no longer a quick win. It had become a long, drawn-out nightmare. By 2004, the Taliban shifted their strategy. They found a new way to attack. Cheap, but incredibly destructive, IEDs. The Americans called them improvised explosive devices. With just scrap metal, some explosives, and clever hands, the Taliban could create weapons that terrified the world's most modern army. They buried bombs beneath dusty roads, hid them in roadside rubble, even concealed them in plastic barrels, fuel cans, or dead animals. Detonation wires lay hidden underground, linked to a switch held by a hidden sniper on a hillside, or simply a pressure plate. When a wheel rolled over it, the bomb detonated instantly. US military convoys became easy targets. Shredded metal and mangled steel, the horrifying aftermath of an IED attack. Vehicle hulls and thin armor were ripped apart in an instant. Shrapnel tore through doors and floors, devastating everyone inside. Kandahar and Helmand became the deadliest regions. Almost every convoy passing through was ambushed. With daily casualties, the Pentagon had to respond. They rapidly deployed a new type of armored vehicle, the MRAP. Mine-resistant ambush protected. Designed with a V-shaped hull to deflect blasts to the sides, minimizing damage to soldiers inside. This vehicle saved countless lives. But it couldn't offer complete safety. Because the Taliban built bigger and bigger bombs. Some powerful enough to hurl a multi-ton vehicle into the air. When the vehicle crashed, fire erupted, burying everything. US soldiers described it as random death. Because on any road, any rock, any pile of dirt, or a shadow in the wind, could hide a bomb waiting to detonate. No training could prepare them for that dread. The Taliban had found a way to sow fear, without ever showing their faces. For US soldiers, every patrol became a deadly gamble. They didn't know if they'd return to base, or just become debris on Afghanistan's barren battlefield. By 2006, the Taliban changed tactics once again. They learned from Iraq, and brought a new terror to Afghanistan. Suicide bombers. This was a weapon no armor could stop. No training could prevent. Because it relied on people. People willing to die just to kill as many others as possible. Then, they were caught. A car, packed with explosives, rammed into a US convoy. The impact alone was devastating, but the subsequent explosion turned the convoy into wreckage. Fire erupted, shrapnel flew everywhere, turning the road into hell. Not just cars, the Taliban used motorcycles too, small and agile. They easily navigated busy streets, reaching US checkpoints, then detonating in an instant. Even pedestrians could become living weapons. A man with a backpack, a woman clutching a basket, or a young man hurrying through a crowded market. In their final moments, they exploded. Blood, smoke, and screams mixed together. US soldiers lived in constant suspicion. Every face became a question mark. A child running for candy could be an innocent child, or a distraction. A man bending down to fix his shoe by the roadside could be a civilian, or waiting for his moment to detonate. There were no clear lines, friend or foe, civilian or terrorist. All mixed in chaos. The Taliban were even more brutal, using civilians as human shields. They hid in homes with women and children. They fired from within crowded villages. They knew US soldiers would hesitate, because one wrong shot could kill an innocent. Humanity became a fatal weakness. Many US soldiers recounted, carrying guilt for life because in the moment of choice, a delay of just 1 second meant their comrade would die. But if shots are fired, even an innocent child could die. These are split-second decisions a soldier may never forget. By now the war in Afghanistan is no longer just about bombs. It's a psychological battle, a battle where US soldiers live in constant fear. Summer 2008, US soldiers were ordered into a small village named Wanat, in Ristan province, near Pakistan. Their mission, build a new outpost. The goal was to cut off Taliban supply lines from across the border. But from the moment they arrived, the soldiers knew they were vulnerable. The village was surrounded by hills thick with trees, obscuring all views, perfect for Taliban ambushes. The outpost was still under construction, defenses unfinished, the perimeter weak. The US soldiers knew they were easy targets. July 13, 2008, before dawn, the quiet in Wanat Valley was shattered as over 200 Taliban fighters attacked. They appeared from all sides on the hills, raining fire from above. Machine guns, rocket-propelled grenades, and mortars exploded. The US position was quickly engulfed in flames. Soldiers fought from unfinished trenches. Others took cover in small houses. But these houses quickly became death traps. Taliban fire was overwhelming, they advanced meter by meter. In many places, the distance between the two sides was just a few feet. Gunfire echoed, cries of men in the smoke. Everything was chaos. It wasn't a long-range battle anymore, but a bloody, close-quarters fight. US soldiers used everything they had, from rifles and grenades to heavy machine guns. But the Taliban were too many. The defense line began to crumble. By the time the last medevac helicopter arrived, it was too late. 9 US soldiers had fallen. 27 others were wounded. Some died on the spot, still firing, others, badly injured, fought to their last breath. This was one of the bloodiest ambushes of the war. The Battle of Wanat left a deep scar on the US military. It proved the Taliban could directly attack US outposts and turn any valley into a graveyard for foreign soldiers. October 2009, one of the most brutal battles of the Afghanistan War took place. The location, Combat Outpost Keating, a US base in Ristan province. Only 54 US soldiers were stationed here, but the base's position was a natural trap. It was built at the bottom of a narrow valley, surrounded by sheer, towering mountains, a position almost impossible to defend. Because from above, the enemy could fire directly onto the base. For a long time, the US soldiers had feared this. They said the base was just a trap waiting to be attacked. And then that day came. On the morning of October 3, 2009, over 300 Taliban fighters launched a full-scale assault. They surrounded the base from all sides. Mortars, rockets, and machine guns rained down. Buildings caught fire, vehicles exploded. Communication lines were destroyed. US soldiers were cut off from the outside world. Nowhere was safe to shelter. They were forced to fight in a blaze. Some soldiers returned fire from trenches. Others tried to defend their positions, but the base was quickly overwhelmed. Close quarters fighting erupted inside the base. Gunfire sounded from just meters away. Some US soldiers fought hand-to-hand for survival. Close quarters combat took place within the base itself. Gunfire at meters away. Some US soldiers forced to fight hand-to-hand to survive. Support aircraft were called in. But even helicopters struggled to identify targets. Because the Taliban hid so well in the mountains, Keating Base became a ruin. Flames soared, black smoke filled the valley. But the soldiers didn't run. They held their ground inch by inch, fighting to their last breath. The battle raged for hours. By the time support finally arrived, Keating Base was almost completely destroyed. Many US soldiers lay dead amongst the rubble. This was one of the most painful defeats for the US military in Afghanistan. Shortly after, the base was abandoned. No one wanted to be stationed where death was always overhead. The Battle of Keating became a chilling warning that in this war, even the safest bases could turn into hell overnight. As the war dragged on, the US began training Afghan soldiers and police. The aim was for Afghans to defend their country themselves, and for US soldiers to gradually withdraw. Americans lived, ate, and worked alongside the Afghan recruits. They taught them to use weapons, patrol, and plan operations. Everything seemed built on trust. But within that trust lay a terrible danger. The Taliban realized they didn't always need direct confrontation. They devised a more sinister plan: to infiltrate their own men into the Afghan army. Men in identical uniforms, with identical weapons, but loyal only to the Taliban. Americans called these green-on-blue attacks. Green and blue, the colors of Afghan and US uniforms. Standing together, they are allies. 2010 to 2012 attacks like these rose sharply, instilling fear in every base. Dozens of US soldiers lost their lives. Not from roadside bombs nor from mountain ambushes, but by those who ate with them and slept in the same barracks. August 2012, in that month alone, 15 US soldiers died by Afghan uniforms. Some were Taliban spies, planted from the start, others radicalized during service. Some forced due to family threats from the Taliban. Whatever the reason, the outcome was the same. US soldiers fell right within their own bases. In meetings, during training, even while resting. This betrayal shattered trust. US soldiers no longer dared to lower their guard. Even during meals they kept weapons nearby. Even when sleeping, guns within reach. Meetings between US and Afghan soldiers became tense. One side training, the other learning. But eyes filled with suspicion. Fingers always near the trigger. One small mistake could turn into tragedy for US soldiers. This betrayal was a deep mental wound, more terrifying than bombs or bullets. Because you can guard against enemies outside, but how to guard against your own mate beside you? On the night of August 6, 2011, a US Army Chinook helicopter flew through the Afghan night. Its mission: support a ground unit in combat. Inside the helicopter were 38 people, including 30 US soldiers, 7 Afghan soldiers, and an interpreter. Most Americans on board were special forces. Notably, 22 members of the elite SEAL Team 6, the legendary unit that took down Osama bin Laden just 3 months prior. The Chinook flew low, nearing its landing zone. But the Taliban was waiting. A shoulder-fired missile launched from the shadows. It hit the helicopter directly. In an instant, the massive machine erupted in flames. The explosion echoed through the valley. The Chinook plummeted to the ground, becoming a fireball. No one had a chance to survive. All 38 on board were killed. This was the deadliest day for the US military in the entire Afghanistan war. The event shocked the entire US. Military families plunged into grief. Soldiers considered the most elite, the bravest, also fell in mere moments. The Taliban immediately claimed victory. They celebrated wildly, wanting to send a message. Even America's legendary units were not invincible. The deaths of 22 SEAL Team 6 members became propaganda fodder. The Taliban crowed that they had taken down the heroes who killed bin Laden. This further fueled the Taliban fighters' morale. Back in the US, the pain was immeasurable. Families of soldiers faced tragedy. Some had breathed sighs of relief when their loved ones returned after years of fighting. But now, they received devastating news. All because of one fateful flight. This event also sparked outrage in the US public. People questioned, after over 10 years of fighting, why was the US still suffering such heavy losses? How much blood had been shed? How many lives sacrificed? Yet victory remained elusive. That fateful night in Wardak became a symbol of US soldiers' vulnerability in Afghanistan. Though equipped with modern gear, despite being the most elite force, in a brief moment, they could be completely wiped out. In 2010, President Obama made a crucial decision. He sent 30,000 more US troops to Afghanistan. This was called a surge. The goal: pour all strength, push deep into Taliban strongholds, hoping overwhelming numbers would turn the tide and open opportunities for the Afghan military to take control. But reality fell far short of expectations. Right after the surge, the most intense battles of the entire war erupted. In 2010 alone, nearly 500 US soldiers died. The next year, 2011, the number was still over 400. This was the bloodiest period for the US military in Afghanistan. It wasn't just cold numbers, but the human cost was immense. Thousands of families shattered. So many soldiers returned broken. Hands, feet, lost to the bombs. Some men, lifelong wheelchair-bound. The wounds weren't just on the skin. They went deeper, inside the mind. US troops patrolled daily, every step could be their last. They take ground by day, but the Taliban returned at night. The fight just repeated. No end in sight. American soldiers started asking, how much blood was shed? How many lives lost? What was the final result? Every village, every hill, every valley. The US forces fought hard, but the enemy always returned. The Taliban never left, they just waited. And when the US pulled out, they came right back. The war became a vicious cycle. Obama's troop surge was meant to be a turning point, but instead, it just led to more bloody battles, adding to the growing list of US war graves. In 2013, the US began to withdraw from Afghanistan. Major bases were handed over to Afghan forces. Small outposts once held by US troops were now given to local police and soldiers. On paper, this looked like progress. But the reality on the ground was different. Whenever US troops left, the Taliban returned. A village captured with blood and tears fell back into enemy hands just months later. A valley that had seen so many US soldiers fall would just reappear when US forces left. For the soldiers still there, the war became an endless loop. They fought, they lost, they retreated. only to return to the same place. The same road, the same village. They told each other, all their sacrifices were wiped out overnight. Hope for victory faded. Meanwhile, Afghan forces were expected to stand firm. But the reality was full of problems. Many units lacked equipment and training. Corruption also ate away at them. Many Afghan soldiers deserted. Some even secretly worked with the Taliban. This made US troops even more desperate. They knew all their efforts, all their losses, could vanish due to their allies' weakness. By 2016, the US role had shrunk. They no longer directly controlled many areas, mostly training, advising, and providing air support. But even off the front lines, death still found them from roadside bombs, surprise ambushes, and betrayal from within Afghan ranks. American blood continued to spill. Afghanistan became a never-ending nightmare. US soldiers lived with the feeling that no matter what they did, the result was always the Taliban returning, like an unshakable ghost. Summer 2021, after 20 years, the US prepared to leave Afghanistan. Bases closed one by one, planes ferried US troops out. The final mission wasn't fighting, but evacuation. Get as many US citizens, allies, and Afghan families who helped the US out as possible. Kabul airport became the focus of all eyes. Thousands crowded the gates daily, desperately seeking a way out of the country. Families with young children, frail elderly people in the throng, all hoping for a spot on the last flight. August 15th. The Taliban entered Kabul with little resistance. Within days, the capital completely fell. The airport became the only exit. Unprecedented chaos. Afghans clung to planes as they took off. Some fell to their deaths seconds later. Inside the airport, US soldiers struggled to maintain order. They had to control the crowds and watch out for attacks at any moment. But the enemy wasn't just the Taliban. Another branch, ISIS. A brutal terror group wanting to prove they were still powerful. They picked Kabul airport for their attack on August 26. At the Abbey Gate where US troops were checking people, a suicide bomber mixed in with the crowd in a flash. The bomb detonated.